This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
On the mean streets of Gotham City, a new breed of supervillains emerges. But deep in the shadows, old school justice awaits. And the Batman, the Caped Crusader, returns in an all-new animated series. The Batman. You won't even see it coming. This is it.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 316 of the DCAU Review. With me, as he always is Cal, and I'm Liam, of course. And Cal, it is the 5th Saturday of the month, and that means it's time to take a little trip around the multiverse. And since we were doing a month of our future DCAU reviews with Batman Beyond and, unfortunately, the Zeta Project, with more episodes of the Zeta Project than ever before, we decided let's look at another DC Cartoons version of a future Batman story. And that has led us once again to one of our old favorites, our old faithfuls, that being the Batman.
That's right, Liam. And as we talked about earlier, actually, have we reviewed? I think we talked about last week. It's been a while since we've reviewed this favorite because we reviewed so many of the episodes of the show last year. But It is actually, ironically, a very important year for this cartoon. We are celebrating the 20-year anniversary of this series debut, originally on the Kids WB. Not this episode. This episode was later on in the series. But as far as the Batman, it's 20th anniversary here, and unfortunately, as we've talked about many, many times, because it grew up in the shadow of the greatest cartoon iteration of Batman ever, widely accepted ever, it's oftentimes overlooked and unheralded and underappreciated. So anytime we get to shine the proverbial bat signal on this series is a good one. And this week, as you mentioned, we have a pretty unique episode that takes place, as you mentioned, deep into the future of this particular universe's Batman, and that is the episode Artifacts, which, as we'll talk about here on the show, takes some inspiration from some classic Batman literature, but puts its own spin on it.
That is right, Cal, and we'll get to that review. But of course, I must first regale us with the official IMDb synopsis for this week's episode. And of course, that segment is always brought to you by the Pod Tower YouTube channel. You can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower. Subscribe today. You'll get videos, all of our full podcast episodes, as well as content from the Jump on the Bat-Wagon podcast and some other DCAU videos and podcasts up there for your enjoyment as well. You can head to youtube.com/the Pod Tower now and subscribe.
That's right, Liam. In this episode, before you get to the actual IMDb synopsis, I'll let you know this aired originally here in the United States on the Kids WB programming block on February the 3rd, 2007, meaning we are coming up here on the 17-year anniversary of this episode's original debut.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for Artifacts, as you mentioned, written by Greg Weisman, directed by Brandon Vietti, with music by Thomas Chase Jones and animation by Dong Wu. And that synopsis reads as such. 1,000 years from now, Gotham City is terrorized by a dangerous villain from its past. The city must discover how to defend itself from this threat without the Batman.
I kind of like that. There's a little bit of mystery and intrigue about who the villain is. It doesn't quite spoil it immediately.
It's a good TV guide blurb for this episode. But yes, as we kick it off, we see we are not in the Gotham City that we know, at least, as we see some very futuristic soldiers or scientists carving their way with lasers. Everything's about spheres and lasers in the future, of course. They got
Mr. Terrific had quite the influence on
I was gonna say, yeah,
technology of this time, apparently.
I hope his estate is still getting the royalty checks for all these spheres floating around. But they cut their way into a cave, and they realize as they see a giant statue and some other accoutrements that they have found the legendary Bat Cave.
We're through. We found it.
We found a cave, Moira. Not necessarily the cave.
This is it. You know it is. We found the Batcave.
Archaeological log. Gray reporting. We seem to have found definitive proof that ancient Gotham's legendary Batman, long thought to be a myth, actually existed. The time is exactly 1900 hours. The date is August 8th, 3027.
Find out that this is set in the far-off year of 3027, as they are looking for some answers, and they finally found this legendary Batcave. They mentioned there's sort of our two point of view characters for this episode being these historians / scientists named Moira and Gray, and they're talking about how they always thought that perhaps Batman was a myth, but that they finally perhaps have found proof. And it's very important that they find the proof, because if they don't discover the secrets of how to defeat this yet to be shown or named threat, New Gotham, as it is called, will be lost forever. And as they're going around the cave attempting to get some lights built up, they see a large thing under a tarp. They pull it off, and wouldn't you know it, it's the Batmobile, but not a Batmobile we're familiar with for this show. This is a much bigger and more tank-like vehicle, and that brings us into the beginnings of our flashbacks, as we see that, as mentioned, we cut back 1,000 years, back to the far-off year of 2027. That's right. This episode, the Batman portions of this episode take place 3 years from now. In the far-off future.
Batman, confirmed sighting. He's at Gotham Airport. Batman? Batman, do you read? What do you read, anyway? After all these years, I never thought to ask. Mystery stories, romance novels, the Sunday comics.
I read Oracle, loud and clear. I'm heading to the airport.
It's the headaches again, isn't it? Ever think that's Mother Nature's way of telling you that you should be playing bingo right now?
I'm fine. Today it ends. This dance can't go on forever.
But yes, as we get started here, we hear Oracle, the adult Barbara Gordon, now retired from her days as Batgirl, radioing Batman, trying to kind of crack wise and bring his mood up a little bit. But it's clear he's in no mood, as he is on the hunt for one of his old nemesis, and we see here a much more highly tech upgraded Mr. Freeze in a giant robot suit, and he's just making everything icy. That's most of Mr. Freeze's plan, as we find out. Not to get ahead of us. He just wants things to be more icy than they currently are, and so he's doing it at an airport. And so Batman is riding into battle, and it seems pretty quickly that he's a bit overmatched, and he's showing his age a little bit. This is a much bigger, thicker Batman. We'll talk about the visual influences a little bit later, but he's showing his age a little bit and seems a little bit overmatched, as Mr. Freeze seems pretty much wise to all his old tricks as to how to defeat him.
Yeah, I think Mr. Freeze is trying to just get to the bottom of the age-old question. What killed the dinosaurs? The Ice Age.
Had to do it. Could not.
Cut. Yep, that's a deep cut right there. If you know, you know.
sure this homemade antifreeze is gonna work?
I've spent years studying freezes cryogenic biology and how to neutralize it. It'll work.
It better, because you know I am not a fan of Plan B.
Try again, Batman. We didn't pierce the exosuit. Guess it's time for Plan B.
Hand-to-hand combat begins between Batman and Mr. Freeze, who, as you mentioned, has updated his exosuit. You might call him or refer to him as Mr. Freeze 2.0. Or you might not. I honestly don't know the answer to that. But the Batman wiki page refers to him as Freeze 2.0. So bit of trivia there. There's also some great trivia facts we'll have to go over later on, by the way, from the Batman wiki. I found them quite enjoyable. Anyway, back to the plot. As Mr. Freeze continues his reign of tyranny, Batman continues having no success against stopping him, and it's at that point that Oracle radios into Batman to let him know that not only that unfortunately, since they're fighting at a airport, that thankfully most of, if not all of the planes have been rerouted, all except one, in fact, which unfortunately was already on its descent and has run out of fuel and has no choice but to land. And unfortunately, as we cut to the plane itself, we see that the pilot is having a lot of trouble. It's a cargo plane. He's coming in from Jamaica, and his plane is starting to freeze up. He's losing control of the plane, and it becomes this sort of rush to find out, is the plane going to crash? Is it going to crash into Batman and Mr. Freeze? Is it going to cause destruction in Gotham? Well, we'll never know, because sliding in and flying in is none other than Dick Grayson himself, who's all grown up. He's no longer the little kid that we once knew. And in fact, he's also not only no longer a little kid, he's also no longer Robin. As we learn, despite being referred to as Robin, he's quick to correct Oracle that he changed his name long ago.
Oracle, the plane!
Nightwing.
Chill, Batman. I sent up a flare. Robin's on his way.
Maybe you didn't get the memo, Oracle, but I've been going by Nightwing for, about a decade or so.
Oh, yeah. I don't know why I can't remember that. Maybe I should try saying it 10 times in a row. Nightwing, 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 Nightwing.
Wing de-icers are at maximum capacity and still losing ground. Oracle, take control.
Why? You got something better to do?
Kinda, yeah.
Nightwing makes his debut on the Batman here and springs into action. He's able to remove the pilot from the plane, leaving just the plane as the issue now, as we have a plane that is no longer being piloted, headed fast and furiously towards the ground. As Mr. Freeze turns his attention to the plane and begins shooting it with a larger beam of ice, this causes it to somewhat slow down and crash into the ground, as Batman is able to get out of the way just in time. However, as the plane crashes, Batman himself is frozen into a block of ice. And that's when we cut back a little bit at that point. There's several cutbacks and forth. And one of the funniest bits that I love about this is that this scientist or archaeologist or whatever they are, whatever their profession is here, they're working with the authorities directly. The girl is supposed to be like this Batman archivist of some kind. She has all this knowledge that she's excited about and sharing and trying to impress her colleague with, and 0% of it is accurate. That's the best part. Like, apparently 1,000 years into the future, you can't just Google something to verify the authenticity, or Google is so corrupt you can't get a straight answer as to what's fact or fiction anymore. So whichever way you want to land there, something's not right here, and all of her facts are off just by a little bit, as she begins surmising that perhaps the true identity of Batman may have been Thomas Wayne, and his wife Martha was the Batwoman, not Batgirl, the Batwoman, and the Red Robin was none other than Bruce himself. And this comes after they discover the bat suit that has been freed shrink wrapped or freeze dried or something and completely preserved all of these thousand plus years. And ultimately, we learn that the goal of these scientists is to get the information from the Bat computer directly. Of course, with 1,000 years passing, technology has well passed this ancient piece of technology by, and getting it to work is near impossible. So we learn that there's something that they're trying to get out of this computer as we cut back to the flashback of 1,000 years, where we learned the true nature of what Freeze is after. He was able to grab a diamond that was being shipped in from Jamaica, and his plan is to use it in his cryo cannon.
The African star.
A diamond, Freeze? You brought that plane down for a diamond.
Diamonds are the hardest substance in the world, Batman. I knew it was the only thing that could survive the crash.
After all these years, you're still nothing but a cheap crook.
As I've been trying to tell Batman, things change.
This is designed so that the entire city will remain under wintry conditions forever. That dastardly fiend, Mr. Freeze, at his worst. But as we mentioned, both of the heroes get frozen in a block, and unfortunately, it's at this point that Batman seems to be out of luck, out of time. He's frozen. Mr. Freeze is about to get his hand, or has his hand on the diamond, and is about to put it to use. And that's when Oracle and a much older Alfred, who does not use a wheelchair, despite the archivist's assertion, Alfred Pennyworth does not use a wheelchair, but is there to still crack wise about everything, mentions that Batman, apparently his senility has gotten the best of him, because the Bat computer is telling the Bat-Wing to fire on Batman's location directly, and we see that missiles then land in, and this hopefully freezes Batman, and indeed it does, from his block of ice. I assume it also unfreezes Nightwing at that point also. And at that point, this allows Batman to begin once again taking on Mr. Freeze, and he thanks Freeze for the opportunity to get frozen, because it's numbed the pain that he was experiencing, as Liam mentioned. This is a much older Batman.
Batman's remotely ordered the Batwing to fire on his position. I can't override it.
Fire on himself? Oh dear. Senility has finally set in.
Thanks for the ice pack, Freeze. All you did was numb the pain.
Also, during this, Oracle took a phone call from her elderly father, of course, James Gordon, asking how she's doing. There's some sort of conversation here that lets on that Barbara has let him know that she has some sort of job supporting fighting crime, but is not he's none the wiser, or doesn't know the exact details as to what she's involved in, only that it's dangerous work. She reminds him that she's doing just fine, and has to get back to work. And we see for the first time there that the wheelchair that they find in the 3027 Batcave actually belonged to Oracle, so we assume that there was a similar tragedy to that of the Killing Joke that has forced her to be wheelchair bound in that sense. So back to the fight on the ground, we see that Batman is able to break free, and he's able to wrestle away the diamond from Freeze, and he's able to use it to crack this impenetrable glass, because as Batman reminds us, diamonds cut glass. So
such like nothing about this feels Adam West except the over explanation, or Super Friends, except for the over explanation of Mr. Freeze's giant freeze cannon that he's going to use with a big diamond. And also
isn't that the
Batman verbalizing that the reason he can inject the antifreeze now is because even diamonds can cut the thickest glass.
Isn't the diamond thing the exact storyline from Batman and Robin too? Doesn't his suit run on diamonds?
I think so, yeah. And he has a big giant freeze gun that he uses in that movie too.
Right, that he's trying to freeze all of Gotham with. So yeah, I think there's bits of stuff that are pulled here from different Batman lore, as we will
for sure
discuss here in just a second. But yeah, it's looking like Batman is going to be Batman has successfully defeated Mr. Freeze, at least this version of Mr. Freeze, but he's actually able to quickly escape as he breaks out of his exosuit, and we see that he is indeed half robot, as he has the spider legs beneath him, and he escapes into the sewers, where he is able to get himself cryogenically frozen, as he announces to no one at all that he will now wait 1,000 years until there is no more Batman to once again retry his plan at freezing Gotham. And that's where we cut back to the future for what we learn as our final bit here, as the officers have learned not only that Batman, unfortunately, the Bat computer is not able to be used as is because of the deterioration over the years.
We didn't find Batman. We found artifacts, lots of pretty things. But unless we recover that data, nothing of substance.
It's no use. This machine just wasn't built to hold code for 1,000 years. The memory engrams are hopelessly degraded.
Unacceptable. Get us access.
Can't be done, I'm sorry.
Gray, your hand.
It's nothing, it's just a scratch. A scratch with a pattern. The titanium.
Gray, what do you...
Binary code. The titanium's covered with binary code. Batman knew that couldn't survive on his primitive computer, so he found another way. Have we scanned it all? Can you translate it?
Yes. Yes!
However, just by accident, our one representative, Gray, accidentally scrapes his arm against one of the gigantic metal beams. And from that, he's able to discover that there is binary code engraved on the beams. And then they, using the power of magic and binary code interpretation, they're somehow able to get the Bat computer to then work, which then leads us to discover exactly what's going on that they've needed to get to the Batcave, and what they've needed Batman's help with all this time.
Naturally. And and they're able to then activate this old sort of talkback program. It's Batman's version of the Jor-El hologram, I guess. And tells them to state the nature of their emergency. They declare that it's Mr. Freeze, and he and Batman, that the program of Batman reiterates that the mission isn't over. And so as we cut there to the scene of Mr. Freeze wreaking havoc all over this vaguely futuristic Gotham City. We don't get to see much of the architecture, but as he's having a great old time, he suddenly hears Batman's voice again.
Beautiful. I love the future, especially since it's 100% bat-free.
If you believe that, Freeze, the cold must be numbing your brain.
What? No, it's not possible.
There's nowhere you can run.
But I waited 1,000 years. You can't still be here.
And yet I am here. And always will be here to stop you, Freeze. Always.
No!
Seemingly sees him up perched on a building. He tries to attack him, but he's quickly overwhelmed, and he's shot with like 8 diamond-tipped darts that have the antifreeze that disables his powers, and is quickly dealt with. And all of the many Batmen he was seeing walk forward and turn off their hologram harnesses to reveal that it is in fact the same team of archaeologists, scientist, cops that we've been following for the duration of the episode, and there's sort of a final monologue about how even 1,000 years past his death, or past the end of his career as Batman, he was still somehow able to look out for Gotham City after all these years. And they show sort of the final shot as the new Batcave being sort of built, and seemingly being built as a sort of a museum and a shrine to the Dark Knight, still somehow watching over Gotham City 1,000 years later. And that is where we fade to black.
Time changes nearly everything, but the mission and the legend of the Batman lives on.
Yeah.
So it's tough, as you may have noticed when we were recapping this. About 70% of this is, and then Batman punches Mr. Freeze, and then Mr. Freeze shoots ice at Batman, and then Nightwing shows up, and Mr. Freeze shoots ice at Nightwing, and then Batman punches him again, and then Mr. Freeze freezes them. It's a very action-based episode. So the framing device of it being, we go from the far future where there's this crisis they're dealing with that's Batman related, and then them sort of rediscovering the history of the old Dark Knight. That's a fine framing device for all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual flashbacks that we see, and again, we'll talk about it. There's a lot to dig into visually, I feel, but as a story, it's not, as far as like the last ride of this version of Batman. And it is implied that he was going to keep on. There's a lot of dialogue, as mentioned, between him and Nightwing, where Nightwing tells him that it's time to retire and pass the torch, and Batman says not until the mission's over. And then as Mr. Freeze escapes at the end, Batman sort of reiterates that the mission's not over. So perhaps this wasn't his final adventure, but that's kind of the way it's framed in the episode. And as it's not that compelling of an adventure. Mr. Freeze is going to try to freeze everything, and so he punches him for a bit, and then he drops the bat plane on him. Like, it's not super. It's not, like we'll say, a lot of stuff I like about this episode, but as far as the boilerplate story of this, I don't love it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you for many, many reasons. I think the DNA is there, as you said, the sort of somebody regaling them. Also, it's not really clear. So she's not telling this story of Mr. Freeze attacking Gotham, which she mentions early on that her dad used to read her a book, Tales of the Bat, which they really missed the opportunity to use Legends of the Dark Knight there, but I digress. Tales of the Bat, and so she's not the one that's really telling the story, so we're just kind of bumping back and forth between the two. I think maybe that would have been interesting, although with the new Batman Adventures and the way that they did their kind of storytelling with Legends of the Dark Knight episode, maybe they wanted to deviate just a little bit. I think it's cool to kind of, pun intended, cool to pull from some of the classic Batman mythos without doing a 1-to-1. This obviously isn't the same story as is told in the Dark Knight Returns or any of the other Frank Miller stories, but you can of course see that this is certainly influenced by that from some of the looks that we'll talk about in visuals. But I think it's just more of it feels just kind of, I don't know. I was expecting more because it was a little bit more special and we're supposed to have this futuristic like version of these characters. It reminded me how much, at least I haven't seen it in years, but I remember enjoying it at the time. But when Teen Titans did their flash forward, and how much I enjoyed that versus this, I was just a little bit disappointed. It's just kind of not very interesting. It very much feels to me like the plot could have been, it's borrowed from Batman and Robin. It's borrowed, as we already mentioned, it's borrowed from just some of the goofier iterations of Mr. Freeze. And I know that this version wasn't, some of the backstory I think was still he's still haunted by his wife's death or whatever, but he's more of just kind of your run of the mill bad guy in this show, more than he is sort of the tragic villain. And I feel like it kind of just it's hard to then take this character seriously, as silly as that sounds, because they both are just running around freezing things still. But I think we've talked about it many, many, many times, how Heart of Ice changed how people look at Mr. Freeze as a character. And even Batman and Robin adopted some of that origin into the Arnold Schwarzenegger Mr. Freeze. But because that character was so goofy, it didn't have the same impact or the same feeling because of the campiness of that movie. So I think because this was more just like action heavy versus plot driven, and I think my hopes were high based on what the plot stylings were going back and forth like this. It just ended up being a bit of a disappointment because it just wasn't very good. And it also isn't like, it's just not, let me say that it isn't great. It's okay. Yeah. Like, it's just not great. And I feel like for an episode like this, where you're using this sort of plot device to flash forward and introduce these different elements, and you're showing the future of what this show would be, we don't really get a new Batman adventure style look at what happened to these characters. So for all we know, this is kind of the true future of what these characters turned into by all means. And it's just kind of disappointing because we don't get a lot of information. Why is Barbara in the wheelchair? What's up with the kind of weird dynamic between her and her dad, where he like calls her and gets the and maybe being more familiar with with this final season would have made a little bit more sense, but out of context, it certainly doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, I went with a 5 out of 10 for plot. I think this had the potential to be a lot better. I do think that, the bones of an interesting story is there. It reminded me, like, this could have been a comic book in any of the tie-in comics that we read over the years that would have played out very, very interesting in comic book form. But I think when it's just Mr. Freeze wants to freeze the city and make it cold forever is the motivation for your villain. And, he intentionally crashed a plane so he could get a diamond to power his thing. It feels a little bit goofy. And the stakes, even though the stakes are supposed to feel very high, they don't. And then we kind of get a cutaway from how the futuristic Batman AI helps the police solve the problem. They show up and there's 5 hologram Batmans that are all, defeating Freeze with his diamond tip. He told them to use the diamond tip stuff, but like, still, it's just kind of very anticlimactic ending. So, for all those reasons, I gave it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I gave it the same score. I kicked it back and forth between maybe a 5 and a 4, but I think it's okay. It's like, I like the framing device. It's kind of fun, the idea of the future archaeologist police coming and learning all of this history, and the one girl, as you mentioned, being off every time is kind of a funny running gag. And even the way they sort of set that up to begin the flashbacks, like they find the Batmobile, they cut to the first flashback. They go back, they find the suits, they look down at the Robin suit, and that's when we cut into Nightwing's arrival. And then the third one is, I can't remember. I think it's when they light up the whole cave and whatever.
Yeah.
So I like those parts of it, like the way they go into the flashbacks, I think is done well. And I think this is written by Greg Weisman, who was like the showrunner on Young Justice eventually, and wrote a lot of those episodes. He also worked on the Gargoyles animated series, which is very well regarded. So it's not as if this is like an actor or a writer without pedigree. But I do think this show is just so action first, and toy selling first. That he saves the day with the Bat-Wave thing that was a part of all of the toys and the marketing gimmicks for the show. That it feels like, okay, well, they did what they could with what they had, and like we said, there's a lot of visual fun to be had in this episode, but it's just like, yeah, large portions of this are just Mr. Freeze is freezing a tarmac at an airport and Batman punches him for a while, and then he keeps getting overwhelmed or frozen, or his gadget gets frozen, or Nightwing. There's stuff. We'll talk about what we like in visuals in a moment here, but yeah, like I said, I think it's a fun idea. I like the framing device of people even further into the future trying to look back to find a solution, and the idea that Mr. Freeze is kind of this theoretically could be immortal character who could live 1,000 years. And still be terrorizing the world. I think that's fun, and the general concept of Batman finding a way to live on past his mortal life to keep protecting the city that he loved is a good bit. So there's definitely good stuff in it. It's just the meat of this. We got a lot of good sides, a lot of good garnishes, but the meat itself is a little bland, I think is what we came to with our 5 out of 10s.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's funny also that in this universe, Batman did the Joker thing from Return of the Joker, where he just uses technology to outlive his mortal life, to then carry on and apparently be some sort of running encyclopedia / AI for people to ask questions to. So very funny.
Also, did he think that Mr. Freeze, he can, as it turns out, that Mr. Freeze was going to survive dropping the bat plane on him at the end? Because that's pretty extreme once you've already disabled his power.
Well, he does say I guess because I think it's Nightwing says, well, that looks like the end of it, but then he says something about not finding the body, or they don't have a body or something like that. So that means that, they sort of do allude to the fact that Batman thinks that because they don't have the physical body of Mr. Freeze, that it must mean that he could return at any time.
Sure. But was he trying to kill him? That's, I guess, what I'm asking. By dropping a plane on him.
Well, that borrows from The Dark Knight Returns a little bit, right? Where
it's Batman, a little ambiguous.
Yeah, maybe he had that. He had that thought process of the Batman Begins. I'm not going to kill you, but I also don't have to save you type of thought.
Yeah, could be.
That you hate.
Yes, I'm not a fan. Yep. Anyway, just thought about it. It's like, he just dropped a plane on him. That's interesting. That's after he'd already cracked the armor, so theoretically he's already been, and his ice powers are gone. I guess he's still in a big, mech suit that could still do some damage in the immediate, but I don't know. Seemed like overkill to me. But hey, any port in a storm, as they say, in a giant ice storm caused by a big frost laser. Anywho, we will move on from plot to our visuals and animation section of the episode. As mentioned, this episode was directed by Brandon Vietti and animation by Dong Wu. Mr. Vietti, another Young Justice alum, and I believe also worked on the very critically acclaimed Batman Under the Red Hood movie with Greg Weisman, in fact. So another familiar team. I think this is kind of when they're just cutting their teeth in DC animation prior to doing all of those things that are mostly better than this, if we're honest. But from a visual standpoint, as mentioned, Cal, that's probably where this episode shines. We get new designs for Batman. We get our first ever look at what a Nightwing would look like in this episode. Even Oracle with her little bat medallion necklace and her librarian hair that she has, I think is really fun. There's a lot of visual flair to this one.
Yeah, they made sure to keep the series look and design of a lot of things, talking about Batman in particular, the way that his cowl kind of comes down and over, it's not quite helmet like, but it just sits, there's like a little lip over where it sits over his face. So doesn't sit flush up against his cheeks. So they kept that. He still has the claws that he has on his fingers. So some of the design elements, obviously his bat belt buckle that sends what's it called? Bat wave or whatever they call it. That's still very on brand for this show. As you mentioned, Barbara keeping the red hair flare that she gets that sticks all the way out, as we're used to, for her turn as Batgirl. Nightwing, don't call him Robin. Nightwing is, definitely takes some of the design elements from not only the Batman the Animated Series Nightwing. I think Batman the Animated Series Nightwing is the first one to include like the bird head on his actual logo on his chest. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then this would then kind of copy that. Now it's kind of, I think they've officially adapted it at some point during after the New 52, maybe, or
that was like around the like 2016 rebirth reboot of that series, when he got out of the black and red suit and back into the black and blue suit. They gave him the old bird head.
There you go. So clearly some homages there to the original design for Batman the Animated Series. He's got the little wing thing underneath of his arms too that he can flip out and fly with, which I liked. But he also sort of resembles, his mask at least sort of resembles the Son of Batman characters that are part of Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns or The Dark Knight Strikes Back. I can't remember if they're just in the first one or if they're in the second one too. But the Son of Batman characters that were present there. So yeah, the look of the characters themselves. Mr. Freeze also, he goes from this kind of buff mech suit guy to now he's this decrepit, skinny, like wasting away type guy in this gigantic mech suit. And you can kind of see, you went from, at least we haven't covered the episode obviously on this show for the Batman featuring Mr. Freeze, but his head is just similar, but you can kind of only see it, the red eyes and stuff in the frozen like ice chunk helmet that he has. This basically, he's wearing a gigantic suit. Now his body, almost neck up or sternum up, is visible, and you can see how he's sort of wasted away within it. So it looks intimidating. It looks kind of cool. I like it. It's certainly worth noting that some of the technology that Batman uses, as you mentioned, the Batmobile, which is a copy paste directly influenced from the Dark Knight Returns Batmobile, the tank that it draws from, the Batwing. I don't, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it looks like a TIE fighter to me.
Sounds like one too.
I would say, was that used on the show prior? And if it was
yes,
look like that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was, they didn't update the Batwing as far as I know. That's not a vehicle they used a ton on this show. He usually he usually had like a rocket glider or whatever if he was flying in the show. But there's, I forget specifically what episode. I think it involves him. There's like a villain in an airship that he has to, he keeps trying to get up there and he can't, and so he rolls out in this weird stealthy bomber TIE fighter thing, as you mentioned. That's I think it works for this show. It's not, and also this show is unlike, say, Batman the Animated Series. Doesn't really have much of a direct tether to like trying to base it in a specific time period. It's sort of vaguely science fiction futuristic. So yeah, it's like, yeah, he can have a weird TIE fighter with that just kind of hovers in the air and then kind of works like this weird dive bomber thing.
Yeah,
that Nightwing's flying in. That works.
Yeah, complete with missiles and stuff. Yeah, I liked that. As you mentioned, it very much is a hand-to-hand combat centric episode. Lots of fisticuffs happening. Batman, despite going up against a giant robot suit, insists on punching it over and over again, and that clearly isn't working, or throwing batarangs at it, which also clearly doesn't work. So, but there's a lot of violence. Mr. Freeze backhands Batman right in the face a couple of different times. So yeah, there's a lot to enjoy visually. I love the snow scenes. I think that's a cool element. I think anytime that we see that, and they really go all out. I guess it's because Freeze is going full Blizzard here in an attempt to freeze Gotham. But I think there's certainly lots of strong visuals, things that are interesting to see. I think the reveal in the final climax also of Freeze just going ham on New Gotham, and then all of a sudden you see Batman appear on the roof, and before you understand how kind of less than exciting the actual reason why Batman appears there, it's kind of like a whoa, like how is he here 1,000 years into the future? This is crazy. And then explaining it away with holograms, it's like, oh, okay, it's kind of lame. But I do like the reveal at least of Batman still being there. So pretty awesome. I think visuals are probably the strongest point of the episode. I think there's a couple of sequences also. Directly when first the plane crashes, they're standing in the snow and the fire is kind of lighting both Batman and Nightwing up. So that you get that orange hue mixed in with the snow that's going on at the same time. And then after Freeze allows Batman to break free, and he's giving that dialogue about how Freeze just gave him something to numb the pain. I thought that looked like I was like, oh, that's a Frank Miller panel. Like that's directly ripped from, like that could have been directly ripped from the Dark Knight. It's this close up from his chin up, and you get this real orange reddish hue glow of the fire as he's delivering this and kind of gritting his teeth. Kind of happily enjoying the violence and the pain. I was like, oh, okay, there we go. That's the Frank Miller influence that we have right there. It was really, really strong. I enjoyed it. Overall, like I said, I think probably the strongest thing about the episode. I ended up giving animation and visuals an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I went just 1 point higher at a 9 out of 10. I think the visuals are quite spectacular here. Even some of the little things like the little prop plane that the guy is flying is sort of ice, the wings and the propellers and everything is icing over as he's flying, and you go inside the cockpit and you can see his breath and all of that. I think they did a nice job with all of the harsh weather elements and all of that. Yeah, I love that Nightwing design. The mask especially, it's something about, I think the highlight color on the mask really keeps it from looking too flat, because they don't give him the longer hair, and I know that's something that Bruce Timm and other people that worked on that new Batman Adventure season said, just because it's not that the design is bad, but because it's so simple, it's just a black suit with that blue emblem, it can look flat in animation, it can look uninteresting or flat in animation. So I think that like the blue highlight color on the mask really helps that out. I like the look of this Nightwing a lot. And then even the bit of like the antifreeze going into the suit and the sort of the orange coloring sort of slowly filling up the suit while Freeze is still trapped inside of it, I think is really neat as well. And then that ending bit where all of the Batman and Silhouette are running around the buildings and Freeze is sort of overwhelmed by them is quite fun too. So yeah, there's some really, really strong stuff, and even some of the little bits of them walking around the Bat Cave where they find the suits and they spin around, very 1989 Michael Keaton Kenner Bat Cave. Where you have the two suits and you can flip them around to reveal the suit behind it.
Spot on.
I was like, oh, love that idea that they're like back to back inside there. So there's some really fun some visual flair. I already mentioned I like that Oracle design a lot. Like she still has the bat emblem implemented on her, even though she's not in the field any longer. So I think that's there's a lot of fun little touches to this in the visuals department. And as you mentioned, our two main heroes getting a complete redesign and overhaul, and is a lot of fun as well. I like Batman's big wrist gauntlet flamethrowers. They don't really work, but when he first jumps out of the bat plane, he's got these two flamethrowers on his wrists that are like the Boba Fett flamethrowers that he's trying to use. So I like that bit as well. So there's a lot of fun little flares in this episode for sure.
Agreed. Yeah, I'm with you.
And from there, Cal, we will go to music. Music in this episode by Thomas Chase Jones. I feel like we talk about this pretty much every time we do an episode of The Batman. They sort of prioritize musical refrains. Like they use like a little guitar, like echoey guitar riff to like punctuate a cool one-liner that somebody drops, or to sort of underscore whatever the tension of the scene is. But there's not a lot of music in these episodes other than maybe that initial fight music. It's a lot of like very fast-paced drum machine sort of pace, and then you get the little synthesizer brought in as the action sort of picks up. And you get these sort of very like sharp, quick string shots, like dun dun dun, as Batman's sort of making contact with some of his punches on Mr. Freeze. But it's really just not a music heavy show, and so there's a lot of sort of either repeated refrains or sort of similar bits of music I feel like we hear in these episodes when we review them, because they're kind of using those stock like guitar riffs to end a scene or to transition or something like that, but not a lot of fully scored scenes.
Yeah, the only things that stood out other than the Batman fare that you were just talking about, when we first see the futuristic version of the Dark Knight, there is a more symphonic, I would say, a string something or other that comes in and plays, and then that theme is once again played. I think after he breaks out of the ice, they sort of go back to that refrain, and then one more time, I think when the modern day of the episode, the futuristic day of the episode 3027, when Batman shows up to Freeze, and Freeze is just taken aback at the fact that he can't escape him, he can't get away from him. That refrain is once again played again, and I actually dug that. I thought it married. It's not quite Tim Burton 89 / I guess what would be the Batman the Animated Series original theme. It's not Shirley Walker, but there's like something in there that makes it feel cinematic in that sort of orchestral movie type of theme. So I dug that. I thought that was pretty cool, and it stuck out from the rest of the what we're used to, as you mentioned. So I ended up giving music a 6 out of 10 based on those refrains and my enjoyment of them alone. As you mentioned, it's not really a show that relies too heavily on the music to set the mood. It's much more dialogue heavy. It's much more punctuated themes than it is kind of what we're used to with the DCAU shows, as we've talked about when we've reviewed these. But it's still good. Still enjoyed that Batman refrain that they went with, and that's why I ended up with a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I went 5 out of 10. Nothing was wrong with what I heard. I do like when all of the hologram Batman show up, and Mr. Freeze kind of has this like crisis. We'll talk about it again in voice acting in a second, probably, but the music that accompanied that reveal of, and you hear Batman's voice talking about, I'll always be here to stop you, no matter how long you've been gone. I think the music that accompanies that is pretty strong as well. So from there, Cal, we will move on to our fourth and final category, which is voice acting. A pretty decent sized cast here. Some a lot of familiar names, both to this series and to the DCAU as a whole. But let's get started on the voice cast here.
So yeah, we have Danielle Judovitz as Moira. Who Danielle Judovitz, she
it's
says
confusing. So yeah, this is one of the most interesting things I think about this episode.
Danielle Judovitz, who plays Batgirl. That's right. So I guess maybe this is one of those things where they were trying to, in some way, insinuate, well, maybe this is like a distant relative of Batgirl, but she plays Moira, who of course is the scientist that's in charge of, or archaeologist or whatever that role is that she's playing there. working with the police. She's the Batman archivist that doesn't know anything about Batman, or doesn't gets all of her facts incorrect. Where were community notes when this girl was around? That would have helped us a lot. But yeah, so she interestingly, yes, plays the voice of Moira. So as we've deduced here, looking through this, so she's Batgirl on the show. And so that's kind of a nice little cute wink and a nod here to to having her play a different character rather than try and pitch her voice down a little bit and play Barbara, I guess.
Yeah, that is interesting. When I was looking at the cast before the show, I was like, wait, so she's in the episode, she's the regular voice of Batgirl, but as we'll talk about in a moment, she is not voicing Oracle in this episode. That's interesting because I like hearing her voice. I mean, she's playing another vaguely adult woman. I don't think she's supposed to be like a teenager or a kid in this episode. So I'm curious behind why they didn't swap that, and maybe it's a scheduling thing, and our other actress wasn't available to do that part or whatever. But it's just interesting that you had your regular Batgirl voice as or maybe they just wanted a stronger differentiate to note there's obviously we don't have our young Robin voice is not voicing Nightwing. We cast an adult man as that role, so maybe they just felt like they wanted someone with more of a different voice to differentiate the time period. But it is interesting that she's still in the show here.
Yeah, working alongside her, I believe, is Kurt Fuller. And Kurt Fuller is kind of working as the associate with her. They don't call them by their names here in this wiki, and that's annoying. Gray. Yeah. Kurt Fuller is working as Gray for the episode. Not a ton to do other than sort of being acting egregious when he's told that they can't get the technology to work that's over 1,000 years old, and is yelling at the guy that works underneath of him to make it work regardless. So not a ton there, I guess.
Yeah, there's like one little scene where them, and I'm not sure who in the cast is doubling as, because it's sort of they put some sort of modulation on it. There's a hologram of like their boss that shows up where it's just his head floating. And he's like arguing with them. And he's like, well, we got to get this done. And you got to find Dr. Frost. He's running all over the city. And that's the big joke. He can't say Mr. Freeze's name properly. But like, so there's like a little bit there where they get to like argue back and forth with their boss and correct him because he says the wrong name. But there's not a lot there. Kurt Fuller, very good character actor.
I was going to say you would recognize him. You would definitely recognize him if you saw him. A lot of movies credits to his name. Ghostbusters 2, a couple of other like 90s action movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger movies.
He's the coroner on Psych. That is how I know him best. He was on a lot of episodes of that show. Played a very eccentric and weird guy on that show.
Yeah, so you would know him if you saw him. One of those guys. Google his name, and you'll probably recognize it. Also, we have Kelly Martin, who is playing the aforementioned Barbara Gordon, aged up Barbara Gordon / Oracle. Kelly Martin, probably best known for her turn as Lucy Knight on the 90s drama ER, which apparently went into the year 2000. Did not know that. But yes, the 90s, 2000. She also voiced a character in a Goofy movie, which is also very popular for people of our age.
Oh, yeah.
So she played
Roxanne. She's Roxanne. That's like the main girl that Max Goof has a crush on.
Yeah. So she's fine. Again, we have a little bit of a dynamic here where she's quipping. She kind of kept that sort of faithful quippy nature that we're used to for this version of Batgirl, and her interaction with her dad, Commissioner Gordon, is not one that is very long. It's kind of like this weird short pit stop that we take in the middle of things, but it felt, at least from her side of things, pretty endearing. I felt that it felt authentic, at least.
Yeah, she gets a little bit more to do. She does have a lot of exposition to throw out as well. Like she names drops that the current police commissioner is Commissioner Yin, which is of course Detective Yin that we met in the first couple of seasons. That was sort of Batman's first police ally, and the man who was at some point Clayface apparently gets his old cop job back.
I was a little
Chief of
confused by
police.
that. Yeah, I was a
So
little.
he reforms at some point, I guess.
Good for him. He all is well at the end. We don't know how it happens, but apparently it happens. We also had briefly there, as we just mentioned, Mitch Pileggi as Commissioner Gordon. Not a ton for him to do, but does have a bit of an interaction there. And maybe the first time that I don't know if we've mentioned him previously in episodes, because I think a lot of the episodes we've covered have been.
Yeah, I think he shows up for a second in the alien invasion. I think he and the Joker are fighting aliens outside of Arkham Asylum, but he doesn't have much dialogue in that scene for sure.
Another character actor you may recognize if you see him on television. Then, of course, we move on to kind of our main cast here. Outside of those we've just mentioned, we have television's Jerry O'Connell as Nightwing. I guess he's not television. He's both television and movies. But Jerry O'Connell, that's right, Kangaroo Jack's own Jerry O'Connell. Of course, probably more famous for his turns in Stand By Me or Scream 2. But kids of our age would definitely recognize him from that all-star movie of Kangaroo Jack. Boy. But
and your aunt, who's on Facebook 12 hours a day, probably knows him from his short-lived daytime talk show.
That's right. And of course, more modern and DC animation fans would know him from Justice League Dark and Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. Lots of those Justice League or DC movies in those.
Superman. Yeah, he's Superman in all those.
That's right.
The Tuckerverse, the DCAU movies.
Yeah, Reign of the Superman, all that. Batman Hush. He's in all of those Superman. So, he's fine. He's not as quippy. He kind of goes back and forth a little bit with Batgirl there, but not a lot for him to do. Other than I think there is that one serious moment where he kind of has a heart to heart with Bruce, about hanging up the cowl, so to speak, and Bruce lets him know once again the mission is not complete. So I thought that was a fine little bit there. He doesn't get a ton to do, but that little bit that he gets to do, the serious dramatic scene there, I thought he did well.
Yeah, it's one of those things, and we talk about this. This happens from time to time where you'll see an actor. I mean, just recently we talked about Wayne Brady being in an episode of Batman Beyond, and he has like 2 lines. And you're like, wow, they got this guy, and he does he's got maybe 10 lines, and he's on screen, and the character is on screen for less than probably 3 minutes of the whole runtime of the show. But I think he does a solid job. Like I said, he gets to have a little tiff with Barbara on his way in, and then he kind of tries to talk Bruce into retirement, and is not successful as we've talked about.
That's right. And we'd be remiss not to mention probably the second most famous and frequently cast Alfred of all time, Alistair Duncan, as Alfred Pennyworth. Not a lot for him to do either, but I do like his quip about Bruce's senility finally setting in once he decides to launch the Batwing missiles to his current position. So I thought that was a nice little quip. Even in his advanced age, 20 years after doing this with Batman, he's still got the quips and the sharp edge of sarcasm to keep him spry.
Absolutely, yeah. He's got he always talk about an actor who maximizes their minutes. Yeah, he basically just gets the one scene, but he gets a couple great lines in there.
That's right. And then we have Reno Romano, of course, as our Dark Knight. We've talked about him quite a bit, Liam. Big shoes to fill, obviously. You're following up the most iconic version of Batman in animation, let alone maybe ever. And you have some pretty big shoes to fill. But what do you think of his sort of older, gruffer attempt at trying to age up his Batman for this? To be honest, there were a couple of instances where it seemed like he was trying, but for the most part, it felt just kind of like the same take that we usually get.
Yeah, like he's maybe like 5% raspier than he already is.
Sure,
but yeah, I feel like for better or worse, he kind of has that gravelly rasp to everything he says already in the Batman voice. So They maybe they could have like tried to artificially pitch him down, but I don't know how that would have sounded. So yeah, as it stands, he doesn't sound that much older, but at least he was already like the younger version of Batman we see in the regular show. He's already an adult man. So you're like, well, maybe his voice just didn't change all that much in the next 20, 25 years, however long it's supposed to be post original show. But yeah, I do think he does have some good lines. We mentioned visually how certain, including the Batman design and some of those moments are very pulled from Frank Miller. The moment where he dive bombs, he airstrikes himself to get himself unfrozen, and then says, "Thanks for the ice pack because you numbed the pain." And then he's got this big smile on his face, and the way he says "numb the pain," I was like, "Oh, that's real good. That's good, crazy old Batman there." Like he really he tapped into something on that one. Like I liked that line, and then the sort of, even though I guess it's not technically the real Batman, it's this hologram approximation of Batman in the future. The the kind of the speech he gives that I'll always be there, and I'll always be there to stop you no matter how far you run or how many years in the future it is. I think he gets some good Batman moments here, but again, as we've talked about, it's such a visually and action packed episode that a lot of it is just oofs and ugs and grunts, and of course with our main villain, a very familiar name.
That's right. Great segue. I saved maybe the most notable and famous, at least to us DCAU appreciators, for last, and that, of course, being one Clancy Brown as Mr. Freeze, not Dr. Iceman or whatever they keep calling him in the show. But Mr. Freeze, or Freeze 2.0, if you're the Batman wiki, of course. Famous most likely for being Lex Luthor in Superman the Animated Series and the rest of the DCAU, but Mr. Krabs himself, probably most recently, as his most frequent and consistent job in voice acting, but still getting some character acting here and there in the Mandalorian and a couple of other things. But how do you feel about Mr. Brown's turn as Mr. Freeze? As we mentioned, we haven't covered the origin episode, or at least the first episode with Mr. Freeze in it. So I haven't seen that in probably almost 20 years, if not maybe 17 or 18 years. So I'm reserving judgment based on it, but I didn't love this because, and maybe some of it's just the characterization. Maybe it's not in the performance so much as it is the characterization of the character that I just don't care for. So it is also a little bit jarring because you can immediately tell that it's Clancy Brown. Like it's a very distinct, unique voice that we're familiar with as one particular very important character in the DCAU. He's cast here as a very different character. And it sticks out to me.
I think this Mr. Freeze sounds like a pervert. Everything he says just sounds like he's just got this really weird rasp in his voice. It just sounds like he's getting real excited no matter what he's talking. I'm gonna blanket the whole city in ice, and then I'm gonna roll it. He just has this weird energy to him. He feels very edgy. He's just got this weird edge to him that I don't quite understand, but I described it in my notes as the rasp of a pervert. So that is what that's my review of his Mr. Freeze. No, it is, as you said, it's mostly his voice. He's talking kind of very slowly and deliberately, and I don't know if he's going for like a little bit of like Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin or something, like he's got that weird kind of really throaty rasp to his voice when he's talking, and I think they also put some kind of a effect on his voice to make it like a little echoey as well when he's in the suit. But yeah, I mean, he's a pro's pro when it comes to voice acting, but yeah, it's got this weird throaty rasp to his voice that and this Mr. Freeze doesn't have like the emotionally dead origin story as we've talked about a lot. So the fact that he's playing it kind of so reserved and controlled is I don't know. I guess it works. It still works for a ice-based character, but the whole kind of point of that character in the other version obviously was that he was emotionally cold as well. So I don't know. I don't think it's bad. I just, it doesn't. When you think of all the wonderful Clancy Brown voice performances on, any number of cartoons, from comedy cartoons to superhero cartoons and everything in between, this is not one that ranks highly for me on his list of great performances.
Yeah, and I think the more I'm sitting here thinking about it, one of the strengths of the Batman cartoon, I should say, I wouldn't characterize one of the strengths of the cartoon as the characterizations of the villains. Like, it's hard. It's hard to follow up. It's hard to be the guy that replaced Babe Ruth in playing for the Yankees. It's hard to be the guy that is the quarterback after Tom Brady, whatever sports metaphor you want to use. Like, it's difficult to follow up the person that's beloved, known, widely accepted as the best. And that was the case not only with Batman, but the rest of the characters. And the show had big shoes to fill, and they intentionally sort of deviated in a lot of ways. But I think it's so hard to not sit here and compare and contrast the performances. And we've tried our best with the episodes that we've reviewed thus far to not do that. But it's just, at the end of the day, when you're looking at it's the same character, it's just a different interpretation. It's like, well, I kind of like the other version better, and this one just doesn't it's not the other one. Like, it's not the one that I like. So it's hard to not let that affect your scores. As you mentioned, like, it's not that Mr. Brown or anybody on the show does a bad job at doing their voice acting. It's just, it's not the one that you like the most. So because of that, it kind of takes things away a little bit. So for all those reasons, I ended up giving voice acting a 7 out of 10. Still pretty strong. I think everybody does a good job, and trying to just sort of judge it as itself. I went with the 7. Like, it's everybody's fine. I like the idea that they kind of do the bait and switch with our Barbara Gordon from the show typically, but cast her as somebody else. I think that little scene that we get between Jerry O'Connell's Dick Grayson / Nightwing with Rina Romano's Batman, having that heart-to-heart, I think that's probably pretty strong. I do like the Batgirl the Barbara and Commissioner Gordon kind of heart-to-heart also. Alistair Duncan kills it as Alfred. So there's still some strong things in here that I want to make sure that I'm not just completely poo-pooing because I don't like it as much as the other thing. So there's some good performances here. It's just not my favorite.
So I myself ended up giving it a 6 out of 10 for my voice score. I think everybody is good, solid, but there's just not a lot of meat on the bone for any of these actors to sink their teeth into, just for all the reasons we've just spoken about.
That's right. I agree with you totally.
All right, Cal, and that will bring us to our final scores here, and tallying everything up. I have a final score of 25 out of 40.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you, just a point higher. I think we disagreed in a couple of the categories, but everything kind of balances out at the end there, with me just giving one additional extra point, and that means my score is 26 out of 40.
That's right. So obviously this isn't part of the mainline DCAU, so we won't really discuss rewatchability like we do for the main universe shows. But as far as something you would want to check out for this show, like I said, I love the concept of going to this future and homaging, The Dark Knight Returns, and there's a lot of visual fun in this episode, but it doesn't really feel very important to the series. There is one more season. There's sort of the prototype Raven the Bold season where he teams up with all the individual Justice League members, but we don't really revisit this future Batman again, and it doesn't really, because it's set 1,000 years in the future, the the farthest flung parts of this episode. It doesn't really affect the rest of the main story. It's not like they drop seeds for this in previous Mr. Freeze appearances that, oh, one day I'm gonna have a big robot suit and a big cannon that turns the world to ice or whatever. Like it's not really any setup or follow up to it. So I wouldn't say you have to watch this one. It's a fun concept. You could certainly have fun with it, but it doesn't feel like one that's super integral to the show.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think because it's set into the future. It's like, hey, what happens to these characters if you're interested in learning like what their version of Batman Beyond sort of looks like, then I guess go ahead and throw it on there. But it really isn't. It really doesn't move too much of the plot forward for the ongoing series itself. So yeah, I would say it's a fun little detour. And if you're looking for the best The Dark Knight Returns inspired animation, it falls into that category, I guess. But I don't know that it would necessarily be on my must-watch list.
Agreed. And so with that, we will begin to wrap up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for listening, whether you do so on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or the aforementioned Pod Tower YouTube channel. We do appreciate you listening. If you'd like to support the show, a great free way to do that is just to subscribe. Make sure you're subscribed to us on however you listen to us. And if you're on one of the podcast apps that lets you leave reviews and give 5 stars, please be sure to give us 5 stars. And we mentioned this most weeks. If you actually write a review, give us a 5-star review on the show, we will actually read it out on the show and even send you a little gift. So that's a great free way to support us. Again, as mentioned, you can also subscribe to the YouTube Pod Tower and help us out that way. Like the videos, share the links, all that good stuff. And if you want to support us more directly, there is a donate button in the show notes here where you can become a monthly supporter. We have a few people who do that, and we greatly appreciate their generosity there. And there's also a link to our store where you can pick yourself up a mug or a shirt or a hat or something and support us monetarily that way as well. We do appreciate you however you choose to support us, however, and you can also follow us at DCAU Review on Twitter and Instagram and Threads, and that's it. Those are the only 3. And well, now they've instituted it where you can post your Instagrams right to Threads. Mm-hmm. So as long as we remember to click that button when we post the Instagram, it'll go to Threads as well. So follow us there.
I would say, I think I auto-selected the other day. It asked me, do you want all of your posts to be posted to Threads all of the time? And I was like, sure, but I don't think this is going to work. I feel like this is one of those things where I have to check a button every single time. But yeah, we'll see.
But yes, you can follow us there on the platforms. Let us know what you think of this episode, this series. As mentioned, this is the 20th birthday of the Batman show this year. Is it the most underrated of the DC cartoons? And let us know what you thought about this specific episode as well. And we're always looking for suggestions for these Elseworlds reviews when they came up. So if you have a specific episode or show you want us to look at, reach out to us on those socials. But next week, Cal, we will be heading back to the proper DCAU, and we are picking up with a new series, or at least a series we have not covered in a little while.
That's right, Liam. We will pick things up in the sunny skies of Dakota as we head back to review some Static Shock for the month of July. We have some exciting ones to get to here, but we will be looking first in our first week here in the month of July at the episode Consequences, which is a season 3 episode that involves Daisy, who gets hurt, and Static blames himself for it. So that old superhero trope of his love interest is injured, and therefore he must blame himself and react accordingly. So looking forward to checking that one out with you next week.
Absolutely, Cal. Cannot wait for that. But until then, I'm Liam.
And I'm Cal.
And we'll talk to you soon on another episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.